Hello everyone, welcome to the TheGeoecolologist. I am Dr. Krishnanand, and in today's session we are going to discuss about one of the very interesting themes in modern geography, that is the concept of feminism and feministic geography. So what is this feminism all about? It is against men, or is it something else? Is it talking about egalitarian society or a society where this domination happens? So in today's session, we are going to learn about feminism in geography and the various ideas behind the development of this concept. So before we go ahead, please like and subscribe to our channel and don't forget to press the bell icon for the updates. So now let's learn about feminism, one of the modern themes in geography that we study and is of great importance and relevance in present scenario. So this advocacy of women's rights is the main important point when we study about feminism. So on the ground of what? The equality of sexes. So it is the inequality that forms the subject matter of what we call as feminism. So inequality between the sexes. So what is male and female, as we see, that is the biology, that is the differentiation. But what happens in a society, there is a furthermore segregation, furthermore inequality on several other social grounds. So feminism is talking about the social theory of this particular inequality that exists rather than just biological. So the most important feature of feminism is that it challenges the traditional thinking. So the traditional thought that we have studied, it challenges it, it questions it. So by connecting the issues of production that we say, the means and mode of production, with the issues of reproduction that is relevant for, especially for women's rights. So the personal with the political agendas. So that is where this question comes into the picture. So the feminist theory is essentially based on these three assumptions. What are these three assumptions? Let's look into it. So gender is a social construct. That is the first important point, that oppresses women more. Now here is the catch. It's talking about women are the oppressed, who are more susceptible to this oppression of this social construct of gender than men. So it doesn't mean that men are not oppressed. But remember, if we compare men and women, women have been traditionally more oppressed due to this social construct. That is the first important point, the first major assumption of feminism. The second is that these constructs are shaped by patriarchy. So another important concept that we are going to elaborate further, that these social constructs are resultant of a phenomena that we study is patriarchy. And women's knowledge, now here is another important point that we have to study, that is women's knowledge, the know-how, the understanding. So that is about these constructs helps in envisioning a future which should be non-sexist egalitarian society. So the idea is based on making the society more egalitarian, that is away from inequality, especially on the basis of what? Gender discrimination. So that is the three basic premise or assumption of the feminist theory. Now, the two relevant concepts that we need to understand, as we said, one is the concept of this gender and the other is the concept of patriarchy. So two important concepts that we need to understand clearly in terms of studying the feministic thought or the feministic geography. So the word gender is often used interchangeably with sex, but remember, it's not like that. The two are different. Sex is just by birth, it is just biological. But remember, gender is not biological at all. It is completely social construct which happens to a person when after the birth, which is not the choice of the person, rather it is choice of the society. So that is important to understand the difference between the sex and gender. So gender is something that is varying with time and space and culture. So here is another important catch, that gender varies in space and time and culture. But remember, sex, which is biological, is constant. So gender is a social classification of the sexes, if you want to study in a simple way. So gender is just a social segregation or classification, spatially into two halves if we can study. So one is masculine and other is feminine. So these are the two segments of what we say is the social classification of gender, the masculine and the feminine. But remember, in modern geographical thought, there are other genders as well. So this is the major chunk of what we say is masculine and feminine, but there are several other intersubjective genders as well. So different masculine and feminine qualities may have their impact on the social space, the spatial relations between and among the sexes that we say, that is male and female. So what happens when such relations are approached by geographers? Now we are talking about feministic geography. So when this is approached by geographers from within the realm of the principle and concepts of feminism, what happens? The concept of feministic geography arises. So when we study about feministic geography, it is based on the principle of existence of this masculine and feminine genders and other genders as well. So it's part of the gender geography that we say when we include masculinities as well, that is geography of masculinity, and also the femininity. So in totality, it is called gender geography. But remember, the subject matter deals with women's position vis-a-vis the men's position, and it tries to understand the processes, the ideas behind why there is this inequality and what can happen furthermore. So analysis of the spatial process. So that is where this idea of gender geography comes into the picture, of which feministic geography is a significant part or a highly social relevant theme in present scenario. Now, if we look at the other term, when we say patriarchy or the patriarch, this term originally derived from the Old Testament, means the rule of father, that is pater in Latin, which means father. So as we say paternal property or paternal relatives, so what we talk about is the people from father side. So the word father comes from pater, and which is the source of this word patriarch. So when we say patriarchy, it basically means the domination of the male part, that is basically the gender which is masculine in nature, that is dominant. So when we say patriarchy, it is stating the dominance of one over the other, of the masculine over the feminine. So that is important. So however, the feminist use of this particular term, when we say, was introduced by a scholar called Kate Miller in her work Sexual Politics in 1970. So this was a groundbreaking work that actually led to this revolutionary idea of questioning the traditional ways of looking at space in geography, especially with the idea of this inequality between sexes, especially on the grounds of gender. So the term may be well understood in the words of Merlin French, that as the manifestation and institutionalization of male dominance over women and children in the family, and its extension to the dominance of society as a whole. So it starts from the family and comes down to the entire society. So that is the idea behind this concept of patriarchy. So the following aspects of women's lives may be under patriarchal subjugation. So what is this basic idea behind that? Let's see. So women's productivity and labor power is the first important aspect that we talk in feministic geography. Then women's reproductive capacity and sexuality, that is the second aspect. Then women's mobility, that is able to be movable from one place to the other by choices. Then second is women's access to economic resources. That is where that importance of dominance comes into the picture. The social, cultural and political institutions that pave or shape this kind of existence that we talk about. So these are the important things that are studied under feministic geography. So feminism as a concept is often misunderstood. Now let's understand how and why it is misunderstood. Many times people think that feminism is anti-men. Remember, it is not anti-men. It is an approach based on this principle of equality. It tries to reduce inequality that is there. So it is many times misunderstood as hatred for men or extreme hatred for men, but it's not like that. If somebody is posing as a feminist and have extreme hatred for men, it means they are not feminist. Feminist always talks on the grounds of equality and tries to promote that idea of welfare of both the genders or all the genders for that matter, rather than just talking about hatred for men and only values for women. So it's not like that. So that is where it is misunderstood, and also it is misunderstood as male bashing. So that is important. So feminist is essentially a female. This is another misunderstood or a myth. Remember, anybody can be a feminist if they are supporting the equality of women rights, women issues, women agendas. So that is important. So a male person can also be a feminist, and a female can also not be a feminist. That is important here. So there is no biological prerequisite to be a feminist. So this is one myth that we should break. And males can also be feminists, and in fact there are lots of women as well who don't believe in this idea of feminism. So the feministic theory upholds that inequality exists between the sexes, and that is what is the prime principle. So it has four notable features that we study in the theoretical aspect. What is that? It is intensely interdisciplinary in nature. Then certain themes are recurrent in it. For example, reproduction, representation, sexual division of labor. So these three important things you need to remember when we talk about feministic theory or feministic geography. So three things: reproduction, representation, and sexual division of labor. It imbibes in it new concepts like sexism. So that is important. The discrimination on the grounds of sex, so which are not only created to address the gaps in existing knowledge, but also to describe the forms of social discrimination. So remember, this idea of sexism is further trying to reduce this gap of knowledge between sexes, because knowledge is power, remember. So the idea of knowledge being given to everyone is the basic idea behind women empowerment as well. So it draws upon women's subjective experience to enrich knowledge. So it negates that objectivity of acquiring knowledge by women in a particular way that society says. So remember, it talks about the subjective experiences of women. So like men and women, all of us can have a subjective experience of the reality that is there, that is what we understand through the knowledge forms. So now let's look at certain works of great scholars which are important in feministic geography. So one of the pioneering work, that is The Strange Case of Missing Female Geographer, that was published in 1973 by Wilbur Zelinsky. It was one of its kind. So the Women and Geography Study Group of Institute of British Geographers, they published a landmark work, that is Geography and Gender, an Introduction to Feminist Geography, in 1984. This led to further institutionalization of feministic geographers, and further what we see is lots of work being done under Institute of British Geographers. In 1982, Janice Monk and Susan Hanson collaborated further to produce this article on not excluding half of human in human geography. So it was a critique to human geography as well, that even if we say human geography, females have not been included. Everywhere it's man who is dominating. So that is important. That's why this work is of prime importance in feministic geography. Then Maisley and Lee's work of her space, her place. Remember, we have talked about what? Existential spaces. So this work is also related to existential space, but it's talking about feministic geography. Now, furthermore, if we see by 1980s what happened, there were great scholarship coming into feministic geography. So one of them, A Woman's Place by Doreen Massey. It was one of the most important work by a great scholar. So Doreen Massey and Linda McDowell, they wrote this article called Women's Place that further energized the feministic geographers. McDowell also published another work titled Coming In From the Dark, that is Feministic Research in Geography, and further it led to the explanation of the position of feministic studies in geography, which was several times questioned, that what are the basic ideology behind this feministic geography. So as the 1990s approach, there was a huge change, huge energy coming in because of the advent of postmodern theories, postmodern social theories. So that led to further more energy in feminism in geography, and further it was strongly grounded. So this fact that can be substantiated by launching of new and exclusive journal on feminism, that was Gender, Place and Culture, a journal of feministic geography in 1994. So see, if we have to validate some kind of study in geography, lots of journals are being introduced. Historically, we have seen So that is how it is now substantiated in the works and the articles that are published in some of the great journals. So this journal was totally devoted to the issues of feminism, gender, sexuality, and so on within geography. So that's why this holds importance. Now, furthermore, if we look at another concept related to feminism, it's ecofeminism, a manifestation of feminist theory in geography. So during the time when feminist issues began to appear in the geography discipline, this green politics had already begun in the West in 1970s, if we see, right from the Stockholm Conference. So this movement of environmentalism and feminism found a common ground of subordination by man. Remember this concept of environmentalism? That is what we have already studied, that environment is being dominated by human beings. But remember, the common ground was environment was not dominated by all human beings, but rather only masculine forces. So that was important here, and that's how they joined hands. So environmentalism joined hands with feminism, and something that came out is called ecofeminism. So this was a new approach to the socio-political theory called ecofeminism. So that is where in 90s this approach comes into the picture. So the original expression of this term, ecological feminine, this was interesting. This was the concept which was the pioneer or the foundation. It was given by French feminist Francois de Aubonne. This was the first important concept that was given as ecological feminine, and the book that was there in 1974 published, it was called Feminism or Death. So this was one of the revolutionary ideas in 1970s. Furthermore, it provided strength to the feministic geographers' writing, and further we see the development of this idea of ecofeminism. So the nature was epitomized as feminine. So remember, nature was now epitome of feminine gender, and male ownership of land and other natural resources were considered to give rise to this dominant culture that was there. So hence they used this word such as rape the land, tame nature, all these things that were talking about the masculinities, and that's where the inequality existed even in talking about environmentalism. So what happened? A scholar called Warren 1987, in his basic tenets of ecofeminism, he mentions these points. What are these points? Let's understand. Women are akin to nature, whereas men are closer to culture. So when we talk about culture, men dominate culture, but they are close to the cultural attributes, but women are actually close to nature. Both women and nature are conceived as producers of life that is ideologically rooted in their reproductive powers. A strong parallel exists between oppression and domination of women and the degradation and exploitation of nature. Understanding this connection between women and nature is the basic requirement to understand oppression of women and exploitation of nature. So a parallel was drawn between exploitation of women, dominance of men over women, as dominance of men over environment. So this was a parallel being drawn in ecofeminism. Further, what we see is that feministic theories and practice should have an ecological association. So this was also being talked about in this basic tenets work. Now further, what we see is that an egalitarian society should be established on the premise of the parallels being equal as well. So that was that nature which was dominated by only men should not be like that, and similarly there should be a egalitarian society that should be free from this dominance of one over the other. So further we see in the works of great scholars like Vandana Shiva and Maria Mies in 1993, another pivot of this ecofeminism work, that is her book Ecofeminism, came. So in this they spoke three kinds of domination. When we talk about domination of this gender, we talk about three kinds of domination in her work. So what is that? Nature by humans. So that is domination of nature by human beings. Women by men. So men dominates women. Humans dominate nature. And global south, the developing nations, by global north, the developed bloc. So it talked about these three debates, these three kinds of dominations. So that is why this is one of the pivot books in ecofeminism, talking about also the idea of feministic geography. So Vandana Shiva, the great scholar, the renowned scientist, asserted that one of the main motto of ecofeminism was to modify the outlook of society regarding activities and productivities of women and nature. So the traditional way of looking at women, the work of women, the activities and productivities of women in the society had to modify, had to change in its outlooks. So both of whom are misconceived. So remember, there is a misconception that has to be removed, as she said in her work. So as passive, resulting in their exploitation. So as feminine gender is considered to be passive in traditional thought process, that's why it is being exploited. So the basic premise of this feministic geography that we see is that it advocates that inequality exists between the sexes over space, which should be done away with to establish an egalitarian society. So remember, clear your misconceptions about that it's against men. It's not like that. It's about equality being promoted. But there are certain radical thoughts as well where you can find some extremities as well. But that's not the crux of feminism. The feminism is more about egalitarian society where this dominance of one gender over the other should not be there. So that is what we studied in this feministic geography. So now, when we have learned about the concept of feminism in geography and various assumptions and ideas behind it, I'm sure it must have cleared your concept. But if you have any more questions, do feel free to comment in the box below. So in the lectures to come, we are going to talk about the ideas of postmodernism. So stay safe, stay tuned, and all my best wishes to you.